drink here in the media center, except for drinks that are covered. We like not to make the place a mess. There is a small coffee shop located just outside here, around the corner. And in fact, I need to remember to do this. We need to silence our Blackberries and cell phones and so forth. We've got the bathrooms and water fountains are out to the left as you exit the conference center. There'll be a break around noon. Escorts are available to show you the way to the cafeteria if you'd like to eat here in the building. And then to return to the conference center, if you do leave the building, escorts will also be available at about 12:45. And then please return in time to get started again at 1 p.m. We do have a full agenda. Presenters should try to stay within their scheduled time. The panel members may ask clarifying questions, and others, however, will not have an opportunity to ask questions. That's not the nature of this kind of proceeding. But after the scheduled presentations, there will be some time which will invite anyone who is not on the agenda and on the schedule to make a presentation. We'd ask that you submit any comments you have to our docket no later than April 18th. The docket number, if you're taking notes, is NHTSA-2010-0162. And of course, you can access that at regulations.gov. If anybody has any trouble with that, just let us know. We'll let you know how to access it. We have on the panel, of course, Nat Buse, who is the director of our Office of Crash Avoidance Standards within the Office of Rulemaking. And in a minute, I will ask our administrator to make some opening remarks. But most of you, I think, know David Strickland and know the passion he brings to the safety mission of this agency, and know that he was, in fact, one of the architects of some of the legislation that we're implementing these days, and it's near and dear to his heart. But along with David's leadership and Ron Medford's leadership, you know the agency is committed to getting the right answer on these tough safety issues. That's why we're here today. That's why we're going to spend the day hearing from those of you who can tell us what we need to know about this particular very serious matter. So with that, let me invite our administrator, David Strickland, to make opening remarks.
Thank you. Dan, thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. I'll just deliver remarks from here for the sake of flow and organization, and I think all of y'all don't need, less of me, more of you is really the key here. This particular rulemaking, all of the work that we do at NHTSA is incredibly important, you know, in terms of making sure that we address the public health crisis, which is traffic fatalities and injuries that happen every single day. Also, our mission is to make sure that we improve the environment and, you know, hopefully help us make us less reliant on foreign oil, you know, in the years to come in our work on fuel economy standards through the CAFE rules. But this particular rule is special, you know, for me personally, and this is why. When I began in the Senate back in 2001 and learned about NHTSA and learned about the process and learned about highway reauthorization and the issues that face NHTSA every single day, one of the first things that came to mind was how you deal with protecting children, and that began with learning about child restraint systems and how we go about improving that and latch and all the issues. And then Jeanette Fennell came to me probably a year later, beginning in 2002, 2003, and talked about the issue of backover, talking about how children especially were victimized by vehicles backing over them, but it isn't a stranger crash. It's usually by a family member, usually the parent. And not only the injuries and the fatalities caused by this particular type of accident, it's already, loss of a child is already one of the most extreme things that can happen to any family. But the fact that a custodial caregiver, a person who loves that child like no other, had some level of interaction or cause for this particular crash, it made it even more tragic. And building upon this issue, getting to the legislative process, trying to get the data. In Safety Lou, NHTSA was given the task of collecting data, which non-traffic crash data for the first time, because these accidents usually didn't happen on the roadway, and our data systems collect roadway crashes in the public way. And when it happens in a driveway, in a parking lot, it isn't covered as well. So the agency had to go back and collect the data to see how many of these accidents we're having. And that then built upon another study to ask the agency to look at the technologies available to address this particular incident. And all that led to the culmination of the hard work of the members of Congress in the Cameron-Gold-Branson Act, which was a high watermark, and it's a really special piece of legislation, and this is why. Usually, safety mandates that come to our agency are usually packaged in reauthorization. The finances and resources to fund all of our behavioral programs and our safety activities, and it's a must-pass piece of legislation to keep the agency running. So with a piece of must-pass legislation, you can get some things done. You know, for example, airbags, for example, is part of a reauthorization. Electronic stability control mandate was part of this last reauthorization. But the back-over rearward visibility was one of the rare pieces of legislation which created a significant safety standard that was a standalone bill. It moved on its own because it had such great consensus between all the stakeholders, the safety advocates, you know, the manufacturers, and the Congress, the members of the Senate and the members of the House, and that really came together recognizing this threat and formulating a piece of legislation based on, you know, the data and the science and the information provided by those stakeholders and the manufacturers, which leads us today. So I have seen this issue evolve from that very beginning. So for me, this is a special honor to try to get this rule finished, because I know how much this means for the American people. It means for the safety of every family. And this, frankly, could be a piece of safety work for this agency, which may change the face of safety around the world in terms of how people are protected around vehicles. So this really does mean something special to me, and this hearing is especially important for us being able to build a record as an agency to finish our rulemaking and to move on to the actual implementation of the rule once it's finalized. Now, in December of last year, we outlined performance standards for this issue, and now, again, we are ready to listen to your comments and your ideas about the proposal. As you know, the Cameron-Gold-Branson Kids Transportation Safety Act of 2007 directed NHTSA to amend the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard to eliminate blind zones and protect pedestrians, particularly small children and the elderly, who are overrepresented in these crashes. On average, there are almost 300 fatalities and 18,000 injuries per year that happen in back-over crashes. We estimate that we can save anywhere from 95 to 112 lives per year, in addition to preventing 7,072 to the upward bound of 8,374 injuries. Let me briefly tell you what we're proposing. We want to expand the field of view for all passenger cars, trucks, multi-purpose passenger vehicles, buses, and low-speed vehicles weighted at 10,000 pounds or less gross vehicle weight. We have specified an area that is 10 feet by 20 feet immediately behind a vehicle that the driver must be able to see when the vehicle's transmission is in reverse. In the near term, we have found that there is only one type of technology that allows us to meet this standard. That is a rear visibility system that includes a rear-mounted video camera and an in-vehicle visual display. We believe that adding the technology to the vehicle fleet will cost anywhere from the range of $1.9 to $2.7 billion per year. As I said in the beginning, we are ready to hear your comments and your thoughts on this issue, but to keep in mind that our focus is to continue to improve the safety of our children and the American public that are both in and around our vehicles. This hearing is an ideal forum to work cooperatively with all of you so that we may take action. Once we conclude today's hearing and the public comment period ends on April the 18th, we will fully consider all comments and will move forward with that in mind. Again, thank you all so much for being here and for sharing this opportunity with us to provide information for us to complete our work on this very important rule. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dan to begin our testimony.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Appreciate the opening remarks very much. We have, for our first presenter, Jeanette Fennell from Kids in Cars. I'm going to sit down, and Jeanette, the podium is yours. And we're in 15-minute segments at this point. I believe you have a video, so hopefully that's all set up to go. Jeanette, thank you.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here today and have the opportunity to talk a little bit more about the issue of backovers, but also really to try to get cemented in everyone's mind that it is impossible to not hit something you cannot see. And I don't know if we haven't done a good enough job or why people truly do not understand or appreciate how large that blind zone is behind our vehicle. When you hear comments like, just turn your head, just look. You can look and you can turn your head and you can use your rear view and side mirrors perfectly, and you're not going to see in that blind zone. And Consumer Reports and David Champion has done an excellent job showing people, but for some reason I don't think people really appreciate how large that blind zone is. So do I just tell you when I want the next slide? Okay, let's go to the next slide. Oh, well, we're already there. KidsInCars.org is a national nonprofit organization, and we work to try to keep kids safe in and around motor vehicles. And, everybody has to have a mission statement, but the truth of the matter is, next, parked cars are dangerous. And, we just see a car sitting there. It doesn't seem like it should hurt anyone. It's in our driveway, but at very, very low, 1 mile an hour, it has the ability to greatly hurt a child, and then we have power windows and kids left in hot cars. So parked cars are dangerous. There it goes. All right, next slide. What does Kids in Cars do? We collect data. We do education, policy, which is laws and regulations, product redesign, which is the engineering and survivor advocacy. So those are, very much the tenets of what our organization is all about. And it was this data collection aspect that brought us to this particular issue. When we first started, we were only working on kids left in hot cars. That was the big thing. But all of a sudden in 2003, we saw this data just come out of nowhere. And we went to our friends at Consumer Reports, and they were very helpful in doing the technical aspects of this. So we'll kind of go through all those areas in this slide prevention, in this presentation. The spectrum of prevention, that's very much injury prevention 101. That is how we can save lives. And if you go from the bottom up, the higher you go on the spectrum of prevention, the better you're going to be at saving lives. So, we want everyone to know that this is an issue. Then we want the community to be educated. We want to educate providers to educate others, working with coalitions, changing organizational practices, and then actually influencing policy and legislation. So today we're here to talk about that top rung. Next, please. I had to show this, okay? This is from the Washington Post in March 16th of 2004. So this gives you a date for it. Now, there's the doors of NHTSA. Can you see the little door there? It says NHTSA. And now, that's me. I think the other guy there is Clarence Stitlow. And you see my long list? I'm like, come on, guys. Why want my information in there? Why don't you have this list of the kids that are being killed in non-traffic? And there's the FARS guys going, hey, there's no data entry point for those type of incidents here. But look how far we've come. Because in 2004, that for whoever put that cartoon together was capturing what was going on. And look where we are today. But the only objection I have, and I'm going to do a side view here. Do you think my nose is really that big? Or do you think it was partly maybe something to do with getting your nose in places they didn't belong? I don't know, but I just had to show that. I never thought I'd have that opportunity to show this particular slide at NHTSA headquarters. Next, please. So data collection, like I said, we've been working on this for a very long time, and way back when, in 2002, we were trying to find data. We went to the CDC. Can you help us? Because nobody had any data. And they did a study, and oh my gosh, what did they find? I'm going to say next because we'll bring the bottom of the slide in here. They were showing over 9,000 children were being brought into emergency rooms, and that's 176 kids a week. Now, that's from absolutely nowhere, and that's back in 2002. So those are the type of studies where someone said, oh, it's just not that crazy, Jeanette. Really, kids are being hurt, and the numbers are very large. Next, please. And then we have our not in traffic surveillance, and we can, I guess, go forward with overall, there's over 1,700 fatalities. And then on injuries, we can go to the next. There's over 841,000 injuries. That's overall what the agency has found. So, and that's the actual, one of the reports. If we just take the kids out of there, next, it would be 262 fatalities, and the injuries are over 115,000. So this is a significant issue. I mean, this isn't like something that we're saying, oh, it's just a needle in a haystack. These children are being hurt. Next, please. I don't know if anyone, most people hopefully in this room have seen this, but this is the CDC chart, the 10 leading causes of death for unintentional injury deaths. To me, this was life-changing the first time I saw it, because you look at the age groups, and there's a whole lot of blue up there, and the blue up there are motor vehicle crashes. All right, and when I saw this, I said, boy, of all the things we need to work on, let's take care of that blue up there, and that was motor vehicle crashes. And for years, I was trying to really get people to understand that non-traffic will be in the top 10 killer of young children. And they're sort of like, yeah, right, But if you look at that chart today, and you look at 1 to 4-year-olds, and you look at just our data, now this doesn't even, include all the things that the NHTSA system has brought in, but if you just look at our data, non-traffic incidents would be in the top 5 killers of the children in that age group, 1 to 4. And it might be higher, as we get our better data collected. But that's significant, and that's something we do need to work on, and so happy we are working on. Next slide. That's a blink, see, so you really notice where that fit, okay? This is another Washington Post quote from Fatal Distraction. This happens to be about the death of children left in hot cars. But there's a quote in there and saying Kids in Cars has one of the saddest databases in America. And the only way I would change that quote is I would take out one of. Everyone would agree, and I think David said, the worst thing that could ever happen is the death of a child. I mean, it just doesn't get any worse, right? One would think it doesn't get any worse. Try being the person who's behind the wheel. Try being the driver of that vehicle. You have suddenly caused the death of the person you love more than anyone on earth. Maybe that child was inside and playing and full of life. And Daddy said, I'm going to run and get some milk. Bye-bye. And the little one heard bye-bye. First time in their life they've been able to open the door and follow Daddy behind. Gets behind the SUV. They can see Daddy. They can see the SUV. Have no idea that Daddy can't see them. They're not old enough. They don't have the cognitive ability to understand they put themselves in harm's way. So that's why I would qualify Kids in Cars database as the saddest in America, because not only are you capturing the deaths of children, but we are talking about, in 70% of these cases, it's a direct relative of that child who's responsible for that death or injury. Next, please. This just kind of shows an overall of the data that we've collected, but as you can see, backovers is the biggest piece of the pie. So we went from it not even being an issue to 2001, 2003 just taking up, just like, straight arrow. And then, like I said, Consumer Reports really helped to help show why this was happening. Next, please. We do education. We try to get as many brochures and information out there as we can. Next slide. We have TV PSAs we brought with us if we have time to play them. We have radio PSAs. We have all these type of things to try to get the word out. Next, please. And then legislation. We work to enact legislation. Next slide. And you know what they say, kind of all roads lead to Washington, D.C., and our nation's capital. But that's where this needed to happen on a federal level. So next slide, please. Strong leadership is important. This was when because we just didn't introduce this bill once, right, David? We had several reintroductions, but this was the last time it was introduced, and Senator Clinton and Representative King were there, again, bipartisan, both sides of the House, when we reintroduced that at the Children's Museum in New York. Next slide, please. Product redesign, I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. Providing a safer environment, redesigning the product to make it safer is probably the most effective strategy to prevent these types of injuries and deaths. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite slides in the whole wide world. And why is that? If you look at that chart, it's 7 minutes of nursery school behavior. So you have your setting with all the little different things the kids can do. Then at 18 months, look at what they do going through that setting. Right? We've all had an 18-month-old. They don't stay still. You know, by 2 years, they might stay a couple of minutes or actually do something, but move on. And then by 2.5 years, they might even have a flow. But my point here is, and this is so important, we will not be re-engineering children anytime soon, unless there's something on the horizon I don't know about. Kids are kids are kids, the way we were, the way our kids are, the way our grandkids will be. They're kids. And they're here today. I mean, they're in one point, and in 2 seconds later you look and they're, 10 feet away. But we can re-engineer products to make their environment safer. And we, as a country or as the world, we've made a very unsafe environment for the children in this world. So we need to make it safer for them. Next, please. Next, please. We kind of stole this, as you might guess, from a different saying, but we say to err is human, but to forgive is design. And people like to point fingers and say, why weren't you with this child 24/7 every second? But we know that's impossible. And kids are quick and they get underfoot. So we feel that design is the forgiveness here. Next, please. And next, please. This picture was taken on Capitol Hill. It was when we came to celebrate and thank all of our legislators, and David was there in his previous position. But these are the people that made it happen, and what more can I say? Our families have come forward after the worst event in their life, and they've had the strength and courage to tell their story. Can you imagine how hard that is? Time after time after time. You're putting yourself up in front of the world and saying, I killed my child. I mean, just living with that. But then the pokes and the jabs and the blogs. But these are the people who came to Capitol Hill, who carried a picture of their child, who did not survive. And only for all of us in this audience and for the public are they doing this. It's not going to bring their children back. They're doing this for others, so other children will not die, and so other families will not have to live the constant grief and pain that these families live with day in and day out. Next slide, please. And these were some of the awards that were given. Again, we do things a little bit different. The middle slide on the top is Michelle Terry. In the hearing room, she sang a cappella Amazing Grace. And it kind of set a tone for the rest of the meeting. Next slide, please. This is all about visibility. And we are pretty bold to say, I don't know if we'll find out if this is ever right, but children are possibly in more danger outside of a vehicle than inside of a vehicle. That's really bold to say. But I'll tell you, in that age group, 1 to 4, we're doing such a good job getting them in car seats and making sure they're safe, but they are very vulnerable. They don't have a chance. Think of 32 pounds, 3,200 pounds. They're never going to win. It's not going to happen. So you can just see the huge increases. And we also are dealing with the issue of front overs. That's not what we're here to talk about today, but I just want to put it on everybody's radar screen. It is acting like backovers did. 7 years ago. So we're seeing a lot of fatalities that way. Next slide, please. Children are backed over. Why? The driver's unable to see the child. Who does this happen to? 1-year-olds. I mean, these kids almost always are 12 to 23 months. They follow a parent or a close relative out of the house. That person is unaware that the child has left the house, and the driver backs up and either kills or causes, in many cases, severe injuries. We call this the bye-bye syndrome because it happens so frequently. We had a little one that followed a relative out yesterday who died in Illinois. The day before, another death in California. I mean, day after day. And it's not easy entering those cases into the database. But it almost gets to a point where you can close your eyes and say, okay, 18 months, followed someone who didn't know they were going to be there. I mean, it's a very predictable and preventable situation. But we have to be able to see what's behind our vehicle when we back up. Next slide, please. Again, we went back to the CDC because we were seeing all these backovers, and they did another study for us. And again, this is way back when, in 2001 to 2003, but they showed 48 kids every week were being brought into hospital emergency rooms because they were backed over. And that's old data. The numbers only get worse. And now we're going to have somebody bring in a patient. Next slide. There we go. Actually, there's sound with that, but that's okay. It's a little ambulance coming in. It always wakes everybody up. All right, next slide, please. And this is something we are trying to promote. I know the agency is doing this as well, but accurately defining the terms blind zone and blind spot. There's so much that's being done with blind spots, meaning when we're traveling along and changing lanes. That is a spot where you can't see the car. A blind zone is what's behind your vehicle and sometimes in front. You can't call something that's 8 foot wide and 30 feet long a spot. I mean, that is a zone. But it does get very confusing, and we want to do as much as we can to keep consumers on what part of the car we're talking about. So we're trying to get everybody to make sure they're using that terminology, and I know NHTSA is, I know Consumer Reports is. So if everybody can stay on that same vein, I think it will help in the communication efforts. Next slide, please. Again, back in 2003, that's the first time, that's the first article that came out. And we called it a spot then. We didn't even have the right words. But when you look at the distances behind those vehicles where you cannot see a child, and the light blue is a 5'8" driver, the darker blue is a 5'1" driver, that's a heck of a lot of area where you can't see if there's a little one. Next slide, please. This is something I wanted to add. This shows the ramp up of sensors and cameras. And, it's interesting. We can say back in 2002, there was one vehicle, and that was an Infiniti, that had a rear view camera. And when people would call from the press, I'd say, go to that dealership. It's the only place you can see that technology in action. But look at today. We have over 200 vehicles that come. Those are 200 models that come with a camera system as standard equipment. Why is that? Well, number one, it's consumer demand. These are the words I hear from everyone. I have one of those cameras on my car now. I would never drive a vehicle without one again. And that is the truth. I know I've been saying that for 10 years. So I think the other thing that's interesting is this year, the number of models with standard rear view camera systems is higher than the number of models with sensors. So that's the first time I've seen that flip. But not only is this a great regulation, it's what the consumers want and what they're demanding, so it all works together. But here's a great ramp up. One of the things with regards to the specific notice of proposed rulemaking we're talking about today is I know it's saying maybe a 130-degree camera would be okay. We feel is the 180-degree camera would be better. And because with a 130-degree camera, there's a little space that's behind the bumper where you wouldn't see a child. And that's where they always go, of course, in the area where that camera might not cover. We've got the technology. It's only going to get better. I mean, once we put those cameras in there, consumers are going to assume they can see everything. So let's give them the best tools that we can. And I've heard there's even a 190-degree camera coming out that's going to be well priced. So if we could put a little plug in for going with something that's going to effectively cover all the area. Next slide, please. And we say, you know, before you turn the key, make sure you can see. And how are you going to see? Of course, we tell people to walk all the way around their vehicle, make sure their kids are with an adult. But by the time you walk all the way around that vehicle and make sure they're with the adults, takes 5 seconds, and they have figured their way out. I mean, they'll come out of the dog door if they need to. I mean, they're very determined little people. So make sure you can see. And this rear visibility would do a lot with that. Next slide, please. We also feel as though consumers would be better protected if we have a camera and a sensor system. I know that's not in the notice of proposed rulemaking, and I know even some of the data that NHTSA has tested shows that maybe that isn't the best combination. But I just know personally, if I hear that beep, you know, I'm right on the camera to make sure. So it would be nice if we could have both, and the automakers must know something, because on their higher end vehicles, they do have the cameras and the sensors. It's almost standard equipment when you look at the higher, more expensive vehicles. Next, please. Thank you. That was easy. I can't thank everyone enough for being here, for giving me the opportunity to speak and to take the time to listen to what this issue is all about. And it is the families, and they are here. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. Appreciate it. Our next presenter is Sally Greenberg from the National Consumers League. Sally?
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. As Dan said, my name is Sally Greenberg. I'm Executive Director of the National Consumers League. I am with an organization that's been around for 112 years of advocacy, working for a more fair marketplace for consumers and workers. And as anybody on my staff will tell you, I like history a lot. And there's a lot of history in what we're talking about here today. And I'm going to talk about some of that because I think it's inspiring. It's a case study of how you take on giants that seem insurmountable, but with persistence and commitment and passion, things can change. I also have to say that I debated whether it was important for me to be here today because there's so many people with personal stories, people who speak more passionately than I can about the terrible hazard of involved in backing a vehicle up and not being able to see behind you. Mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles and grandmothers and grandfathers and brothers and sisters who know all too well what happens when you back up blind. But then I read this incredible proposed rulemaking and reflected on just how far we've come in 8 years. And I felt the need to come and talk about, as I said, that history. So bear with me because, again, I just think there's so much value to understanding where we were and where we are today. So I first met Jeanette Fennell at a press conference she planned in a Safeway parking lot in Bethesda. I think it was in 2003 or 2004. At the time, I was serving as Senior Product Safety Counsel for Consumers Union. I wasn't really sure what I was going to see out in this suburban mall. It was a Safeway parking lot, and I remember one of the reporters complained to me, "What are we doing out here?" Something in the notice for the press conference told me to go. So when I got there, what I saw was a really scary demonstration of blind zones. And I also heard a heartbreaking story that was told by a grandfather whose grandson had been backed over and killed by a relative. And that was actually the very first time I'd heard about this scenario. As I drove back to my office in Washington, D.C., I couldn't get that grandfather's story out of my mind. I couldn't stop thinking there must be a better way to make that car safer. So I called up Jeanette the next week and asked if she'd come and meet with me and see you next time she was in town. So one thing led to another, and Jeanette and I, when she did come back to Washington, we went to see Kevin Fogarty, who was working for Representative Peter King's office. And the reason we went to see Representative Peter King is because Gary Gilbranson, Dr. Gilbranson, lived in his district. And Jeanette had a videotape Those were the days of VHSs. She popped it in the TV, and it showed pictures of. It's the first time I'd seen him too, which included pictures of this precious little boy, Cameron, who had been killed by his father, who was a pediatrician, who couldn't have loved this little boy more or kids more. Kevin looked at us and he said, "We'll drop a bill," just like that, for which we were ever grateful. But that's when things got really hard, and what a difference 8 years make. I credit so many people in this room for their diligence, their hard work, their compassion, their relentless advocacy, their financial investment in coming to Washington, their political savvy, and above all, refusal to take no for an answer. So what did the world look like for correcting what should be a pretty simple fix, blind zones in the vehicles that we drive? Here's what we heard as we walked around to congressional offices or talked with representatives from the auto industry or met with, sadly, NHTSA officials. We heard, "We can't fix this. It's the parents' fault. If they were more careful, their kids would be safe." We heard, "It's the kids' fault. They should be trained not to run behind cars." We heard, "It's too expensive to fix the blind zone problem. Cameras are going to cost hundreds of dollars, and these prices are going to be passed along to consumers, and consumers don't want to pay for things they don't use." David Pittle and I, who was at Consumers Union at the time, met with most of the American and foreign car makers in Washington to talk to them about this technology. We had drunk the Kool-Aid. We were with Jeanette 100%. We really thought this was a problem that could be fixed and needed to be fixed. And none of them took up the challenge to be the first to adopt a camera or rear visibility technology. We also heard cameras don't work. Consumers won't use them, and they won't pay attention to them. We heard cameras don't work at night. You can't see anything. Well, I have a camera on my Prius. It works better at night. I can see so much. I'm a real convert to cameras. Having had them in my new vehicle, I just can't imagine being without one. We heard beepers signaling a person or object behind the car will just go off for no reason. Consumers will ignore them, and they won't do the job. One former head of NHTSA, who shall go unmentioned, told me personally that he didn't think NHTSA should have to work on this. But since it was kids, he was told they'd probably have to. We heard there are no numbers or data to demonstrate that this is really happening, and we don't believe kids in cars because their data is not official. We heard we can't keep statistics about events that happen in people's driveways or parking lots. We heard these are freak accidents. They don't happen frequently enough to merit government action. And they certainly don't merit forcing a redesign of every vehicle on the road at a cost of billions of dollars. I'm sure I've left something out of that list, but it gives you the flavor. But guess what? I didn't read any of that in this rulemaking. What we were discussing this morning is a sea change, 180 degrees different. And it made, I have to say, Mr. Administrator and other NHTSA officials, it made my heart soar. What I read was, instead, from this rulemaking, because many backovers occur off public roadways in areas such as driveways and parking lots, NHTSA's ordinary methodologies for collecting data as to the specific numbers and circumstances have not always given the agency a complete picture of the scope and circumstances of these types of accidents. Wow. I read in this rulemaking, with regard to injuries and fatalities related specifically to backovers, these account for an estimated 63% of the fatalities and 38% of the injuries. Finally, some government statistics on backover hazards. I read, similar to previous findings, backover fatalities disproportionately affect children under 5 years old and adults 70 or older. I didn't know that about adults 70 or older, but statistics and data are really helpful. When restricted to backover fatalities involving passenger vehicles, children under 5 account for 44% of the fatalities. Finally, an acknowledgement that kids are disproportionately affected, and it isn't the fault of the parent or caregiver. I read costs for the rear view video systems are estimated at approximately $58 to $88 for vehicles equipped with a navigation system or other type of multifunction display, $158 to $189 for vehicles requiring a dashboard mounted display screen. We were hearing thousands when we walked around and talked about this issue, whether it was to NHTSA or members of Congress or certainly to members of the auto industry. So, finally, costs that aren't wildly exaggerated, acknowledgement that cameras do work, that people in NHTSA, the NHTSA's technical staff has tested them and they're actually effective, and people, when they see something behind them, stop. And I particularly loved, while these benefits cannot be monetized, they could be significant. A break-even analysis suggests that if the non-quantified benefits, some of it's a little legal-easy, amount to $65 to $79 a vehicle, the benefits would justify the costs. That is music to my ears. And I have to say, Mr. Administrator, when you were on Capitol Hill, it was an open door policy, and we took terrible advantage of you. We went and saw David Strickland without an appointment 95% of the time, unlike everyone else. He always had a few minutes for us, and often more. It was, I'll give you a few minutes, and it turned into a half an hour. That made a huge difference, and the fact that you're here today and able to effectuate that policy is just so satisfying, I think, for everybody, and I hope for you as well. I brought along a few visual aids. Nothing as fancy as what Jeanette showed, but I want to also take my hat off to David Champion, who was my colleague at Consumers Union. What he did as a leader of the auto test site in Consumers Union, he understood this issue immediately. This chart in Consumer Reports, which had the blind zones behind 4 different vehicles, was so powerful. What it shows is that a Honda Accord, even a Honda Accord has a 15-foot blind zone. But the really shocking thing, and the wizards, with David, in David Champion's leadership, the wizards at Consumer Reports were able to do this beautiful drawing. This is, by the way, from July 2005, showed that the Chevrolet Avalanche had a 7-foot wide and a 52-foot blind zone behind it. I mean, it's really hard to say no. We don't have to do something when you get a chart like that. So that's critical. I want to take my hat off to Jackie Gillen and Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety, because when they put this chart out, price comparisons of vehicle technology, we kept hearing, it's too expensive. Well, really? That's interesting, because consumers are spending $1,200 to $2,000 for a DVD system. And they're spending $700 to $1,500 for a moonroof. And they're spending $650 to $800 for seat warmers. And you can't figure out how to put a camera in the back of a car or some kind of technology to look and find out that there's a little kid behind you that you could hurt. I think you can manage this. So that was a huge piece of advocacy as well. I also want to take my hat off to Automotive News, because this is one of my all-time favorite editorials. It reads, and it was Keith Crane, and this is the newspaper that talks to the industry, and they like to think of themselves sometimes as the conscience of the industry. Well, I love this Automotive News editorial, because when we were in the thick of it, trying to get this thing over, trying to convince people that this was an important issue, Automotive News did a safety versus profits editorial, and my favorite paragraph in that is, all safety-related devices should become standard equipment on all vehicles. No choice. It's not an economic decision. It's a moral decision. When the choice becomes profit versus lives, the decision should be simple. Amen to that. So I want to, one last piece that I thought was brilliant. There's 62 kids behind this Chevy Suburban, and if you get in the vehicle, and if you look in your rearview mirror and you look in your side mirrors, you can't see a single one of them. Now, need anything else be said? And yet, this was a terrific piece of advocacy, but we still had to fight these battles to get here today, and how happy I am that we're here. So I'm just going to close and say a new day has dawned. I look around the room, I get emotional, because so many people here played their own unique part in getting this legislation passed and helped shape NHTSA's rulemaking to make a universal rear visibility standard a reality. I just want to add one thing. We work a lot with union guys, and I was at a meeting this week with laborers, and they say over 25 workers every year get killed. I know you don't regulate the vehicles that are over 10,000 pounds, but they're getting killed because they have terrible, terrible blind zones on their pickup trucks, on their dump trucks, and they could solve that problem too. And Mr. Administrator, when you made the comment that this, at the beginning of your remarks, that this was going to be a sea change for safety, for auto safety, I think it's going to spread around the world, but I also think, and I hope that it will also spread to vehicles that are not regulated by NHTSA, but also need the same kinds of protections. So I'm going to say thank you once again for the incredible work you've done, for the change 180 degrees. This is exactly what NHTSA should be doing. The comments you made, it's exactly what the administrator of NHTSA should be saying about safety. We can do it. We must do it. We are doing it, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Sally, very much. I appreciate it. And the materials you were showing us, you may want to submit to the docket. That would be fine. Our next presenter is David Champion of Consumer Reports. David, thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Administrator, for allowing me to talk here. If we can whiz through to get some speed going, yeah, we test cars, we buy them. Safety is main object. Move on. That's where we work. Move on. You've seen this chart before. And as Jeanette and Sally were saying, they came to see me. And if you know Jeanette and Sally, saying no to Jeanette and Sally is not an option. It was, you need to do something about this, and you need to do it now. So we actually started measuring in 2003, and this is the chart that you saw. So let's move on from there. We've seen the cameras in the cars. We've seen many more cars come out with these cameras. We think the camera size is very important. This we think is a good size because you can actually see. And I'm going to talk more about the car side of it rather than the people side, because I'm an engineer and that's what we do. We mess with cars, not with people. You wouldn't want me messing with you. Next, please. This is the one on the Toyota Sienna. We think this is far too small. It's, I don't know whether you'll see it, it's the little tiny screen at the top. You've got a very wide field of vision. As my eyes get worse and worse, actually it's a long way away, so, because now I read a book when I put it on the floor, because that's the only way I can see it. But that is too small, it's too far away, you can't see enough resolution in the picture to see if there's something there. Especially if it's small and moving, you might not see it at all. Next, please. This is the one in the rear view mirror. This works pretty well most of the time, but occasionally when the sun is coming in from the side, you get a huge reflection coming across the mirror. And I don't know whether you can see, but that little square is the image behind, that you have no idea what's there. Next, please. Like Jeanette, we think you need to be able to see the rear bumper. Most of the cars that we've tested, you can actually see the rear bumper, and it's very easy to judge if there's something right there against the back. This is a small bicycle that's right up against the bumper. I think the regulation is a foot. We think that's too far because something could be in that area. We think you really need to see up until the rear view bumper. And watching some of the kids that come out when we've done these demonstrations, they sort of put their hand on the bumper and they sort of hang on to the bumper, you know, for some support. So they're not walking a distance away. They're actually, you know, using it to crawl around to a certain extent. So I really think we need to see that rear bumper all the way across. Next, please. The big issue that I have with these cameras is if the engine is running and the car's been running for some time, you put the car in reverse, the camera comes on automatically, really, really quickly. However, when you start the car up first thing in the morning, it takes quite a lot of time for the systems to boot up behind, some of them up to 9 seconds. And we've actually seen in Connecticut where the temperatures have been really cold, and I'd love to be back in California, because it's going to snow today as well. The colder the temperature outside, the longer these systems take to boot up. We started measuring them when it was warm, but we think 2 to 3 seconds difference between 20 degrees and 45 degrees, because we've done some at 20 and 20 degrees and some at 45, and it makes about 2 seconds difference. And it's all the other systems behind the rear screen that is being loaded onto that screen. So it's things like satellite radio, the HVAC controls, and all the other systems. And I have a small video. I hope it will play next. No, it won't. Never mind. What we did was we actually timed how long it would take for, this was the Town and Country that we used. We started the car up from scratch, put it into reverse. As soon as we put it into reverse, we started a stopwatch. 7.8 seconds it took before the display came up on the screen that you could actually see behind. We then measured how far you could go in that 7.8 seconds, and it was 28 feet. And that's just at idle. That's not accelerating back. And this is something that we've seen on many cars. You get into the car first thing in the morning, you turn it on, put it into gear. I've backed out of the driveway by the time the camera comes on. So within the regulation, I think you really need to specify that from cold start, the camera needs to come on within 2 seconds, rather than, because the manufacturers will play, look, start it up, chat to you for a while, put it into reverse, look, it comes on within 2 seconds. But that's not how the consumer uses it. Getting into reverse, pull back. 2 seconds is actually a relatively long period of time before that camera comes on, because you can actually move quite well. When it's cold in the morning, I'm in the car, into reverse, and get some heat into the car quick. So you can actually move before that starts. Talking about the manufacturers, we had a meeting, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago now, at one of the major manufacturers. And they went through, why are you pushing this? Why are you pushing this? Because here's some reports that we did, and it showed that the backup cameras are only 42% effective. And they were going on, it's only 42% effective. And I sat back, I was getting quite annoyed by this point. And I said, look, I'll take 42% effective over nothing today. If you can come up with something better, put it in. And, that's where data works. It's only 42% effective. Why do we need to do this? But we do. We do need to do it. It is something that really does help. And for me, getting old, when I look back, especially if I've been playing soccer, it's like, oh, to try and look behind. Those backup cameras, especially as the baby boomer generation gets older and older and other people come along, we are going to be less mobile and less be able to really look behind you. So these cameras are a real must. And thank you very much, Mr. Administrator, for pushing it so far. Thank you.
David, actually, I have a couple of quick questions, if you don't mind.
It'll cost you.
On the human factors question of, I guess, toddlers running and approaching the bumper. Did you? I know this wasn't necessarily you did like a sampling of how they behave, but how, in just your rough estimate, how frequently did sort of that pattern of running up to the bumper and actually touching the bumper or tucking under the bumper, as opposed to coming to the back and going to the side to try to get to mommy or daddy?
It depended where they came from. If they were coming directly from the back of the vehicle, then they didn't tend to get close to the back bumper. But if they had to get around the car, so they were coming from one side and they wanted to get to the driver's side, to the door, they nearly always sort of went along and actually felt the bumper as they went along behind the vehicle. It's more of an observation. A lot of what we do is we put stuff out there and you go, oh, geez. It's difficult, especially with toddlers, to get them to do the same thing twice.
Right.
I have teenagers now. It would be nice to get them to do anything except sit on the couch. So, that was just purely observational. The way, if they were coming from the opposite side of the vehicle and they wanted to come around, they always sort of felt along the back of the bumper.
Okay, thank you for that. Second question was on the startup issue. In the range of vehicles that you guys tested, was there cars and systems that did well in the cold start scenario? Is there anything systematically that, did you speak to those manufacturers, sort of like, is it just a booting sequence that's independent of the other systems? How did those folks explain sort of how their design rationale, how they managed to get a fast boot up with a cold start?
Well, surprisingly, Audi was one of the worst, and we just got a new Audi, and it's almost instantaneous. And Audi came to see us, and we said, you know, what's going on? And they said they're booting up all the other systems. I said, well, what you need to do as soon as you turn on is boot up the camera and the screen. Everything else, you know, turning on the radio, turning on the nav system, turning on everything else, can happen in the background, because that's not something that you're going to use immediately you get into the car. Or you can wait a couple of seconds to do it. But the camera screen actually comes up. I can give you, we've probably got about 30 or 40 vehicles we've done this timing with, and they range from, as I said, about 9 seconds, and some are like just under 2 seconds. From startup, we start up and then immediately put it into reverse. As soon as reverse is engaged, we timed it from that point.
David, thank you so much.
Thank you.
David, I have one question on that point too, if I could. Sorry.
The noise came from over there.
Well, I'm sorry. I managed to throw my voice, I guess.
Ventriloquist.
Been called other things, but the question is this: measuring the time, the 2 seconds. We're talking. You said, I thought, from cold start, but
Yes.
a lot of the discussion talks about measuring from putting the vehicle
Yes.
in reverse. Your recommendation is from cold start before putting in gear?
I think you need to do what the customer does. They start the car and they immediately put it into reverse. So from immediately putting it into reverse, I think that 2 seconds is probably just about enough. I'd like to see it a little quicker when they put it into reverse. But people don't start the car and then wait 9 seconds to put it into reverse. And it's that cold start. Right. And I don't know whether could you play the video that's there? If it may be a little more. It was on the stick. Yeah, that one. The interior, yes. So what I've done is I've got into the car. Now I start the stopwatch. And you can see that we're moving, and the camera's still not showing anything. And the quality isn't quite there, but when you saw her finger go, that was when the picture came on. And that was 28 feet on that car, and that was just at idle. And most people actually go backwards quicker than that. So we start, as soon as we put it into reverse, which I thought it was a normal thing that people would do, but the system is booting up behind this time, then there comes quick acceptance, and then the rear camera comes on. If you start the car and sit there for a while and then put it into reverse, it'll come on instantaneously. Okay.
I have a question for you, David.
Yeah, no.
I wanted to touch on the screen size issue. And so two things was one on your thoughts on the minimum aspects of what we had put in the proposal. And then the second question is what you had said about the display and the rear view mirror. And from your experience, I mean, what is the countermeasure you would do to alleviate that?
When you look at the size, I tried to, I'm sure you had an electrical engineer with a screen, because I read through it about 9 times. And if you're ever suffering from insomnia, you know, a NHTSA report is a wonderful piece of...
We'll try to make it snazzier for you next time, champ.
Right. So going through that, I couldn't quite understand, because it's very technical, that side of it. I'm a mechanical engineer and not very good on that. But so from that point of view, we were just going on, these are what we see in the cars. We buy about 80 cars a year. Yes, most of them are coming now down to about 25,000. We've seen them coming in as you know, or with a package as a standard package, and up. They're pretty much universal. But the small one on the Toyota that's way, way forward is so far away from the driver's eye that you've actually got to sort of like peer at it to see if there's anything there. If there's something moving or there's something in the image, it needs to be a good size so you notice it. That is just too small. The mirror, because it's closer to you in most cars, although if you look at something like a Scion XB or some of those very square cars, the mirror is quite a long way away from you. So that very small display is not as easily recognizable. But the big problem is if you have the sunroof open and the reflections coming in from the side, you turn the car and then all of a sudden you can't see. The reflection coming off the mirror is just too much to see. It's a smaller, it's much more of an issue in certain sunlight. It's not a continual issue, but it's still a concern to us.
Okay, thanks.
Okay?
Thank you.
David,
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you. Our next scheduled presenter was to be Jackie Gillen, but Jackie, I think, is still waiting for some slides to arrive. So we're going to ask Sue Oriema to make a presentation. Did I pronounce your name correctly? Thank you. Thank you very much. Sue is from Kids in Cars.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to come here and speak today. I'm a VP with kidsincars.org, and I'm also the parent of a survivor, so I'm here to tell you the story today of what happened with our family. This is my daughter, Kate, and including a small picture of how she looked shortly after what happened with our family. On May 27th, 2005, as I was leaving my house to get into my car, my daughter, then 3.5 years old, decided that she wanted to go with me. I had gone out of the house, walked around the back of my vehicle, gotten into the driver's seat, belted in, got ready, and put the car in reverse. Checked my mirrors, looked over my shoulder. What I didn't know was that my daughter had darted out of the house without telling the adult who was with her, and decided, wanting to reach me, she ran, as David was explaining, around the back of the car, very close to the bumper. Within a second or two of my car moving, I heard screaming. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was children playing in the neighborhood for a split second, and then I stopped. Luckily for me, I had heard a story about a pediatrician on Long Island who'd backed over his son, and he didn't survive. But for that reason, I knew what I heard. I knew I had backed over someone's child. Not for a second did I think it was my own daughter, because I had left her in the house with a responsible adult. She had never run out of the house before. The next thoughts raced through my mind at lightning speed. Had I run over my neighbor's child? Was my car on top of a child? Was the tire on top of the child? Should I move the car forward, move it back, or just leave it where it was? But something told me to move the car forward. When I got to the back of the car, I was shocked and horrified to see my own daughter. Her face was covered in blood. Her clothing was torn from the impact. She was bleeding from her arms and her legs. She was conscious, and she was screaming, "Mommy, Mommy, you hit me with your car. Why did you hit me with your car?" My answer to her was simple. While I held her and cried, I said, "I didn't see you, honey." Those moments and the moments that followed remain crystal clear in my mind to this day. I'm not sure if my neighbors heard my screams or Kate's screams, but within seconds, all of the women on the block surrounded me. Kate had brought herself to her feet, but we took her and laid her down on the grass. One neighbor called 911, while another ran and got Kate's blankie for her. One mother took my older daughter away from the situation into her house so she didn't have to witness any more than she had. Another ran across the street to see if Dr. Morrison was home. I'll never forget sobbing on my neighbor Marilyn's shoulder and saying, "I ran over my child. I hit my child with my car. I almost killed my own child." Because I'd moved the vehicle forward, we didn't know if the tire had run over Kate or if she had been just hit by the car, but she was treated as a full trauma victim. When the ambulance and 5 police cars arrived, they took my baby and put her in a neck collar and strapped her to a backboard. Her scared eyes were so big when she looked up at me and said, "Mommy, why are you crying?" And then I was dealt another blow. A friend looked at me as they loaded Kate into the ambulance and said, "You know you need to call Michael, right?" I was hysterical, saying, I can't call my husband and tell him that I ran our daughter over with our car." Of course I did, but he was 5 hours away and couldn't get home quickly enough. So while I suffered with the guilt of having inflicted these injuries, still unknown in nature, he suffered fearing the worst with only periodic phone calls from me at the hospital. The scene at the hospital was like one out of the TV show ER. A full trauma team took over once the paramedics got Kate into the examining room. I was literally shoved aside and stood sobbing in the corner while they assessed Kate. No chances were taken because, as I mentioned, we didn't know if the car had actually run over Kate or if she'd simply been hit by the car. Full body x-rays and a myriad of tests, and miraculously, Kate had not a single broken bone and no trauma to the head. The neighbor who witnessed this scene was unable to talk about what she saw for over a week. Coincidentally, this same woman, my neighbor, had backed over her daughter a few years before this, and her daughter had survived. but suffice it to say it was extremely traumatic for her to see this unfolding. She screamed when she saw Kate running out of the door, tried to stop her, but Kate didn't listen or Kate couldn't hear. Ultimately, she told me that she saw Kate run towards the car, try to get the back door open to get in, and when she couldn't, she ran around the back of my car. She was hit by the right rear corner of the car where I had stopped just before the tire reached her. Months later, Kate actually overheard me telling the story and explaining that I hadn't run over my child, I had hit her with my car. And she piped up at age 4.5 and said, "No, Mommy, you ran me over. I looked up and I saw black. The car was on top of me." Cue the guilt pangs right here. That night in the hospital, I knew I'd received a blessing that my daughter had survived such a close call. Had I not stopped when I did, she certainly wouldn't have survived the weight of the tire. I also knew that I needed to share my story so that this wouldn't happen to other families. I went on to read and learn about backovers, the contributing factors, and the prevention methods, which is how I found my way to kidsandcars.org. It took me almost an entire year before I was able to talk freely about what happened. Throughout the first year, I really struggled with the guilt and tried to understand how this could happen to a loving, caring, and attentive parent like me. And in the end, the answer was so simple. It was the same answer I gave Kate that day. I couldn't see her behind my car. This wasn't about being a bad parent. When I started reading about other families who had experienced backovers, the vast majority of whom suffered the unthinkable tragedy of losing their child, the same basic components ran through the story. The child had slipped out of the house or away from a loving relative and wasn't seen by the driver as he or she backed out of a driveway. The stories read just like my story, but their story had a few extra seconds. One of my responsibilities for kidsandcars.org has been to document backovers that we become aware of through media stories and other sources. This is a very difficult thing to do. Every incident is extremely tragic, and we know this will have a lifelong effect on the families. The statistics from the CDC study of hospital emergency room records showing that at least 50 children a week were being backed over, with at least 2 of those incidents ending up in fatalities, showed also that in over 70% of the cases, it was a parent or other close relative behind the wheel. Each week for many months, I would receive the case files so that I could log them into our database. Many weekends, particularly during holidays and in the warmer months, I would struggle thinking to myself, somewhere in our country, at least 2 children this week are going to be backed over and killed by a vehicle in someone's driveway. And inevitably, by Monday morning, these stories would be in my inbox. It happened week after week after week. I knew it was going to happen, but I couldn't do anything to stop it. That's why we, the families who have experienced this type of tragedy, or in my case, a near tragedy, along with Jeanette from Kids and Cars, have continued to come to Washington, D.C. to speak at press conferences, to tell our stories, talk to members of Congress, testify at hearings, submit our comments to NHTSA, because we know that these incidents are happening every single week, and we know that at least 2 children are dying every single week, and many, many more are being injured. We do our best to educate parents and drivers in any way that we can, through media stories, speaking at conferences, TV public service announcements, attending safety fairs, talking with family and friends, and anyone who will listen. I literally got a woman on the sidewalk in New York City the other day and told her my story. Long story how it got started. But I've been known to tell a lot of people in the line at Starbucks. But to systematically and comprehensively educate the American public is a monumental feat. Even if we could reach every single driver and parent in the country, we're still faced with the inevitable, well, that would never happen to me. I'm careful. That's what I thought too. Many people believe that backovers only happen to parents who aren't careful and don't watch their children well enough. The reality is backovers don't discriminate between these so-called good parents and bad parents. They happen to doctors, lawyers, professors, stay-at-home moms, doting grandmothers and grandfathers, adoring uncles, and the list goes on. They happen because the driver couldn't see the child when they were backing up. The only way to truly eradicate the problem is to address the largest contributing factor, the lack of rearward visibility, which is, of course, why we're here today. I'd like to speak directly to 2 points with regard to the proposed rule. Along with Jeanette, I urge NHTSA and the DOT to require the 180-degree camera and not settle for a subpar fix with the 130-degree camera. There's no logic to knowingly settle for the 130-degree view when the capability exists to offer a full view for the driver. To leave out a small portion behind the bumper, so close to the tires, the area where the child is most vulnerable to fatality, would be irresponsible. This is exactly where my Kate was when she ran around the back of the vehicle when I was backing up. The other point I'd like to address is about the cost-benefit analysis. To take into account only children who are killed by backovers draws a very incomplete picture. In addition to the at least 2 children per week, as I said, at least 48 children are injured seriously enough that they require a trip to the emergency room. On behalf of the families with whom we work, whose children survived, I can assure you that their backovers were not a non-event. Many of these children suffered life-threatening injuries that required multiple surgeries, ongoing rehabilitation services for years following their incidents. I question the costs that are taken into account in the case of survivors because the cost of surgeries, rehab, psychotherapy. What about the cost of divorces for the parents who couldn't resolve their differences about who was to blame? How do you account for the parents who may commit suicide because they simply cannot forgive themselves for taking the life of their own child? With regard to a cost-benefit analysis in general, I recognize that this is what is done. But the reality is, speaking as human beings, not as scientists or economists, you can't put a price tag on a child's life or the devastation that it causes for an entire family when a child is killed by another family member. I fully recognize that what happened to my family doesn't compare to what happened to the families who lost their child to a backover. But still, in spite of the fact that Kate survived, the effects that our backover has had on our family reach far and wide. For me, it's been the guilt I've struggled with, knowing that I hit my child with my SUV, and the fear that it might happen again whenever I back out of a parking space. For my husband, it was struggling with feelings of blame, and yet trying to be sensitive to how I was feeling, knowing that I was beating myself up plenty for what had happened. My in-laws described to me years after the incident what it was like to get a phone call from their son, saying that their daughter-in-law had just run over their precious granddaughter in the driveway. My mother-in-law tells about her feelings when she arrived at the hospital, saw a gurney with Kate on it, covered in a blanket that she had crocheted for her, being wheeled out of the room into the hallway, and fearing the worst. My children can tell you how my off-the-deep-end overprotectiveness following the incident affected our entire family for a very long time. And my friend, who is the adult in charge of the house, in charge of Kate, still struggles on a regular basis with the guilt. She blames herself for what happened, in spite of me reassuring her that it wasn't her fault, that I had told her it was okay to let Kate play in her room while she was in the kitchen. I have great difficulty imagining what it would be like had Kate not survived. The point is, even in a situation where a child survives a backover with very few injuries, it is a life-changing event for all of the friends and family involved. I believe that we're here today after 10 years of hard work, after many families finding the strength to come to Washington and tell their stories, to take this and push it over the finish line. I know we're almost there, and I trust that NHTSA is going to do the right thing. And I thank NHTSA for offering me the opportunity to share my comments. And I applaud your efforts for applying a comprehensive rearward visibility standard to the entire fleet of passenger vehicles and light trucks in our country. Thank you.
Sue,
Thank you very much.
Sue, thank you for sharing. Thank you.
The courage it takes for some of our presenters is pretty amazing. We really appreciate that. We'll note that throughout the day. Jackie, are you ready now? I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Jackie Gillen. Is Sean going to join you, or is it?
I'm going to talk for a few minutes, and then I'm going to ask Sean to step
Okay.
up here.
All right. So
Okay.
Jackie will begin her presentation on behalf of Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Jackie Gillen, and I'm Vice President of Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety, and we're a coalition of the major consumer health, safety, and insurance companies. First of all, I want to thank David, not just for the rule, but for organizing this Cameron Gilbranson reunion that we're having here this morning. It's really great to see a lot of the friends and people that we worked with so long. And second of all, I wanted to talk about, there's been a lot of discussion of the history of this rulemaking, and it really started out in 2005, again, when Administrator Strickland was on the Senate Commerce Committee, where we got a provision in the Safe to Lube bill directing the agency to begin data collection. And that was really the first time that we moved forward on this issue of trying to really look at what the public health and safety problem is. Advocates not only works to pass legislation that's going to save lives on our highways, but after the legislation is passed, we also work to make sure that the laws are implemented the way Congress intended and the parents, safety groups, and the public expected. And this rulemaking is an important step forward in achieving that goal. We have known for many years, and data shows, that people, especially children located in the area behind the vehicle, cannot be seen by the driver even when we have vehicle mirrors. While the size of the blind zone varies with the design of the vehicle, all light vehicles have such a zone, and it is a serious threat to the safety of children and adults and pedestrians and cyclists. We've talked about why we are here today because of this important legislation. We were fortunate to have very dedicated bipartisan sponsors. I would be remiss not to mention that at the then Senator Hillary Clinton and Senator Sununu from New Hampshire, as well as Representative Jan Schakowsky from Illinois and Representative Peter King, were our leaders and allies, and they never gave up. And we are also very privileged to have brilliant congressional staff that were working with us at the time, and we never lost sight of the goal, and this really was an issue that has been at least 8 or 9 years in the making. For too long, drivers have been driving blind while using the reverse gear, and efforts to educate the driving population about the potential for backover crashes are not enough, especially when we have the technology to address the problem. Clearly, every driver needs to check behind their vehicle before they are backing up, but even when that's done, it's no guarantee that a child or an adult will not enter the blind zone in a matter of seconds. And I think we have found this issue with other auto safety issues where obviously education is important, but when you have the technology to save a life and you have the technology to eliminate the blind zone, it's time to move forward with that. And I want to, when Sally Greenberg, who was working with us at the time, and when she spoke this morning, she held up a document that advocates used during our advocacy where we showed what consumers are willing to pay for different features on their new cars. I'm just going to take 30 seconds, and it's not in my notes, to tell you a story about that. We actually used that document in a meeting with 2 senators who were in a key position on this issue to make a decision about what moonroofs cost and what DVDs were costing. And right after Joan Claybrook and I had the meeting with these 2 important senators, the auto industry representatives then came in and made their case, and we're talking about the excessive costs of some of these safety features like the rear cameras, at which point one of the senators turned to the auto industry spokesman and said, "Here's a list that I got from Joan Claybrook and advocates. Why don't you turn to them as your suppliers because they've got really good prices here for you." So anyway, and that story is lore in the highway safety community about that. Anyway, for several years, advocates and others have called for safety countermeasures to ensure that drivers do not back up blindly and children are not needlessly harmed in backover crashes, and we commend NHTSA for this rulemaking. The NHTSA has proposed a performance standard for rear view visibility that at present would require a rear-mounted camera system and an in-vehicle display, and we think that is the way to go with this. For those who work for the agency, with it advocates, there's always a however. However, this rule could greatly be advanced, and we urge you, and Sean will talk about this a little bit more, that we really do not support the agency's proposal to exempt low-speed vehicles, small school buses, and school vans from the application of the final rule based on a lack of documented backover cases involving these types of vehicles. First, a lack of cases involving these specific vehicles and the limited databases available addressing the subject of backover is not sufficient grounds for the exemption. Providing exemptions specifically for vehicles which interact largely with the population most at risk for backover should not be founded on the premise of, well, it hasn't happened yet. Secondly, while NHTSA has mentioned that the operational conditions of these vehicles may be a reason for the lack of occurrence of backover. There is no guarantee that these conditions for a given vehicle will not change over the life of the vehicle. For example, if a school van, which is exempted, might further down the road be purchased as a used vehicle by a family for private use, and then they will be denied the safety benefits of a rear camera. We support this NPRM. I will now turn to Advocates Research Director Sean Kildare, who will discuss the more technical issues. And thank you for your patience in allowing us to get our slides. Thank you.
And Jackie, after Sean's presentation, I actually have a couple of questions for you as well. So if you
Okay,
can come back
great.
to Mike when he's finished, it'll be
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Morning, everybody. My name is Sean Kildare. I'm the Director of Research at Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. As Jackie mentioned, I am the however part of this discussion. And it does tie into specifically Sue's presentation that she just mentioned. And specifically the two areas that we're concentrating on are some problems that we found with the coverage area that's being required and the display performance. And so to address each of those individually, I'm going to start with going over the coverage area. When we looked at what the limitations were based on how the rule is set up, the rule limits the sight lines for behind the vehicle based on the positions of the test objects, how much of the test object needs to be seen, where they're placed. The first problem that we found, not necessarily a problem, but just a weak point that we're trying to point out, if you look in the overhead, what we see here in Figure 1 is for the first two test objects that are closest to the vehicle, based on those test objects and the required sight lines, which are shown here in red, there is an area that's about 1 foot deep and goes out to the extent 5 feet on either side of the vehicle that is still blind by these requirements. The other problem with this is that it is based, the position of those pillars, the test objects, is not based on the width of the vehicle. So as the width of the vehicle increases, more and more of that non-coverage area is being included. And going back to Sue's presentation, I believe that's exactly where you said, Kate, recall? Kate was. This is one area that we were hoping to have addressed. If we go to the next slide, the second issue, similarly dealing with sight lines, because that's going to define what the minimum requirement is. Currently, the systems that are going to be implemented are required to show a 5.9-inch minimum width of the test object. For the test objects nearest, it needs to show that width. For the test objects that are second closest, out at 10 feet, it needs to show the entire height of the object. The problem with this is for those vehicles that have the most problems, and again, I feel bad that I'm picking on you today, but going back to Sue's issue, when you have larger vehicles like SUVs where the cameras can and most likely will be placed high up on the vehicle, you can end up with a blind area that can extend out to about 10 feet and covers the entire area right behind the vehicle. The circle that we see above there where it says minimum area of test object top surface will tie into my next problem, or the next issue that we want to raise, is that if there's no requirement on what portion of this needs to be seen, what 5.9-inch width of the test objects need to be seen, that little blue area off to the right-hand side of that circle is 5.9 inches wide. That's all that's required to be covered under the current standard. We think that this should be addressed by requiring a height and a width, and this ties into our the other problem that we have with the coverage area. If you go to the next slide, speaking about the 5.9-inch width, what I've shown here on the left is the test object with a 5.9-inch wide stripe. In the current regulation, it doesn't state where that stripe has to be. They just say that they just put it on the pole and that it is centered. However, it doesn't say that you have to see the center of the pole. So what we've done here is we've shown what the approximate dimensions are of an 18-month-old relative to that test object. We've shown what happens if you only see the if the child is directly facing the camera. The middle view there will show you what you will see. If the child happens to be at 90 degrees to that, in the fourth view we can see that you're seeing even a smaller portion of the child. And finally, in the last view, we can see that without issuing a regulation that specifies not only the width but also the height of the viewable area, you can barely catch the top of the child's head to see. And we're concerned that this may not present enough information to the driver for them to recognize that that is a child. The last thing that we were hoping to bring up with regards to coverage area has to do with a volume requirement. We understand, and having worked on these issues before, that you have to set your minimum sight lines. You have to have some way to test this. You need to have a reasonable, repeatable method. The problem is that if you set the minimum sight lines with where the test objects are and not having a center test object that's required to be seen, if at some point down the line a vehicle came up and cameras got cost effective enough, as we've been proposing, if someone went with a 2-camera system, you can literally end up with a blind spot in the dead center of this zone because you're only testing at the outside limits of it. It's not necessarily to say that we need to add another pillar, but that adding in the requirement that you need to see the entire volume as defined by the sight lines within that area would help require them to check that. That pretty much covers the issues that we had with coverage area. We're just trying to hope that, and in line with looking for the 180-degree cameras, that we're minimizing the areas, specifically those that have been shown to have the highest rate of occurrence and specifically the highest rate of fatality. The second topic that I wanted to discuss was regarding the display performance. The biggest issue that we've come to is the response time. We noticed in the original AMPRM it was set at 1.25 seconds. There was information there that there is an ISO standard for the response of sensor systems at 0.35 seconds. However, the statement is important that it says at 0.35 seconds, any system which did not meet that would be failing at preventing these backovers. When we look at the data that was presented in the NPRM, it says that at the 2 seconds, which is now being proposed, 50% of drivers will have started to back. Started to move their vehicle in reverse prior to receiving any type of video. If we can cut that down to 1.25 seconds, we get down to only 10% of drivers. And if we can go down a little bit further to 1 second, we can get down to just 5% of drivers. And to provide an example, that at a response time of 2 seconds, traveling at only 5 miles an hour, the vehicle will cover 15 feet. That's 3/4 of the coverage area that's proposed, rendering any system that meets that standard ineffective. I don't want these to seem like I'm going after the rule. We Advocates strongly supports the rule. We're just hoping to encourage to get the best rule out there. I want to thank you for the time and for allowing me to speak here and be the however. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. We appreciate it. Jackie, can? No, just you're absolutely.
Hey, Sean, before you get off the mic there, if you go back up, I have a question on the so your slide 2 there. One before this one, I think it is. Yeah. So the business about where that stripe needs to be has actually generated a lot of discussion on the other end about how to test for compliance. But in this example, it seems like you would not be able to see the rest of the pillars in that zone. Is that true? So in other words,
no,
in isolation, maybe you couldn't mount the camera that high because you wouldn't be able to see the rest of the zone.
No, actually, what the red line there represents is the minimum sight line. So if we're following it straight down, you can actually see the pillar that's at 10 full height, the pillar that's at 10 feet full height, the pillar that's out at 20 feet. The issue that we're having here is, given that there's no requirement for the height of viewing those pillars, 5.9-inch width, if you have a height, if this was an SUV instead of a representative car, what you end up with is only capturing a 5.9-inch width at the very top of that pillar. So the area underneath everything that's attached to you would not be seen.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sean. Now, Jackie, I had a question actually, since you have insurance companies as part of your as part of Advocates, in that there's clearly been market momentum, and we've seen more camera systems be part of standard equipment of vehicles. Have your insurance members of Advocates, have they been incentivizing drivers with camera systems? Like if you have a camera on your car, do you receive some type of an incentive or a discount on your premium, or is there anything like that's happening in the market right now?
David, I can get that in for you. I don't know. We have 8 companies on our board, and they all sort of do their own pricings and incentive differently. But I'm certain I will be glad to ask them if they're doing that.
Okay,
But,
great.
yeah.
No, that's all I need.
That's
Thank
it?
You. Yep, that was it. That was
Come
the
on,
question.
give me something else. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Jackie,
very
Sean.
much. You may have noticed we did not take our break, and we started late. So what we're going to do is to continue with presentations. Of course, if people need to use the facilities, they're outside and to your left. We're going to continue through until the lunch break. Our next presenter will be Rachel Weintraub from the Consumer Federation of America.
Administrator Strickland, Senior Associate Administrator for Vehicle Safety, Daniel Smith, and Director of Office of Crash Avoidance, Nathaniel Boyce. I'm Rachel Weintraub, Director of Product Safety and Senior Counsel for Consumer Federation of America. CFA is a nonprofit association of approximately 300 consumer groups with a combined membership of 50 million people that was founded in 1968 to advance their consumer interests through advocacy and education. I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I also would like to thank my colleagues at Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety, Consumers Union, and Kids in Cars, as well as the families who have turned tragedy into advocacy for all of their work on this issue. I usually work pretty exclusively on product safety issues, but last week at CFA's conference, I was advocated to by Jeanette Fennell. And she requested that I speak today, and with the support of advocates and of Highway and Auto Safety, here I am, and I'm very happy to speak to you this morning. As the Director of Product Safety for CFA and the mother of 3 young children, I applaud NHTSA's proposal for rear visibility. Improving rear visibility is critically important. Drivers need better tools to detect pedestrians in the areas behind their vehicles to minimize the likelihood of a collision with a person when the vehicle is moving backwards. While I don't have a driveway, whenever I'm backing out of a spot in the parking lot of my children's preschool, I am very aware of the extensive blind zone that limits my view in the area behind my vehicle. I am cautious, and as I walk into the school with my 3 children, I have a physical contact requirement that we all must be touching each other. And I'm so nervous as I see children running ahead of me or behind me as their parents are trying to bring their lunchbox and school bag and manage everything as they walk into school. It's a very stressful and scary time in the morning. I know that just as I can't see children who are behind my vehicle, the other drivers, mostly in their minivans and their SUVs, can't see mine either. So this standard will make school drop-off and pickup less stressful and vastly safer. It will reduce the numbers of deaths and injuries from backing incidents in parking lots, driveways, and streets across the United States, and it will save lives and prevent tragedies. Also, I read a lot of rulemakings, most not written by NHTSA staff. And I must say this rulemaking is extraordinary. The way in which it analyzes the data, protects the public interest, and uses technology to save lives is remarkable and really commendable. The proposed rule seeks to expand and strengthen the current rear visibility requirements for all passenger cars, multi-purpose passenger vehicles, trucks, buses, and low-speed vehicles with a gross weight of 10,000 pounds or less by specifying an area behind the vehicle that a driver must be able to see when the vehicle is in reverse gear. A little bit of background, which you all know very well. Congress required NHTSA to develop a database of fatalities and injuries to document the annual number of child and other pedestrian deaths occurring in backover crashes. A backover is defined as a crash which occurs when a driver reverses into and injures or kills a non-occupant, such as a pedestrian or a bicyclist. NHTSA therefore created the NHTS, or Not in Traffic Surveillance System, to compile data about non-traffic crashes, fatalities, and injuries that are not otherwise recorded in NHTSA's Fatality Analyzing Reporting System, or FARS. The NHTS data shows that there is an annual toll of nearly 500 deaths and an estimated 48,000 injuries in light vehicle backing crashes. Many of the deaths and injuries that occur as a result of backing crashes involve children who are located in the blind zone that we've discussed today, behind light vehicles where they cannot be seen through normal use of the vehicle mirrors. The NHTS data showed that many people, especially children located in the area immediately behind the vehicle, could not be seen by the driver. While the size of the blind zone varies by vehicle, all light vehicles have a blind zone. To address the hazards posed by backover collisions, Congress passed Section 2B of the Cameron-Gulbranson Kids Transportation Safety Act of 2007, which requires NHTSA to expand the driver's rearward field of view in order to allow drivers to detect pedestrians who are within that blind zone of the vehicle. NHTSA responded to this law by issuing this very effective proposed rule that we are discussing today. The existing safety data shows the compelling need for a strong and effective safety standard addressing rear visibility. Based on NHTSA's assessment of available safety data, every year there are an average of 292 fatalities and 18,000 injuries, of which 3,000 are incapacitating as a result of backover crashes. Of those 228 deaths and 17,000 injuries were attributed to backover incidents involving passenger vehicles. In analyzing the data, NHTSA found three important things. First, that many of the incidents occurred off public highways, in areas such as driveways and parking lots, and involved parents or caregivers accidentally backing over their children. Second, children under 5 years old represent 44% of the deaths. And three, when a pickup truck or multi-purpose passenger vehicle strikes a pedestrian in a backover collision, the incident is 4 times more likely to result in a fatality than if the vehicle were a passenger car. In this proposed rulemaking, NHTSA proposes to do 5 things. Institute a test to ensure a driver's ability to see an image or display of a specified area immediately behind a vehicle when the vehicle's transmission is in reverse. 2, institute performance standards for the display or image provided to the driver in the required test. 3, institute durability testing of devices installed to meet the proposed test. 4, define a phase-in schedule to ensure 100% market compliance by September 1st, 2014, and define the phase-in reporting requirements. The proposed rule would apply to all passenger cars. NHTSA indicates that a rear-view visibility system consisting of a rear-mounted camera system and an in-vehicle visual display will be necessary in order to meet the requirement of the proposed rule. Consumer Federation supports and applauds this rulemaking. Now I want to go into a few reasons why we support this rulemaking. First, CFA supports the proposed rule because it will save lives and prevent injuries caused by backover collisions. It's estimated to prevent over 7,000 injuries and save the lives of approximately 100 individuals every year, many of which will be children. In addition, the scope of the proposed rule is appropriate since it will apply to all light vehicles, including both passenger cars, which account for a large proportion of the population of backover crashes, as well as SUVs and LTVs, which are associated with an elevated rate of occurrence. Further, the rule includes an effective technical solution to address the occurrence of backover collisions. This strategy rejects an approach that relies solely on efforts to train and warn and educate very young children, as well as drivers, about hazards posed by backover collisions. Education and training alone will not prevent these collisions. Rather, technical solutions, such as those that this proposed rule indicates, will go far to reduce deaths and injuries from these collisions. This proposed rule will also be beneficial because it acknowledges the effectiveness and necessity of rear-view video systems for preventing backover collisions as compared to sensor-based systems which have been proven ineffective on their own. Additionally, the proposed rule establishes an adequate required coverage area, which will address many regions behind the vehicle with the highest risk of occurrence of backover. The proposed rule will also require small children to be observable across most of the coverage area, thus reducing the risk of backover. Finally, NHTSA has taken into consideration the societal emphasis on saving the life of a child as part of the cost-benefit analysis. The agency acknowledged the elevated value placed on the life of a child and the personal anguish experienced by friends and family with the loss of a child, especially in the case when the backover, where they are often the cause of the child's death. And as consumer advocates, we can never 100% talk about a rule without some suggestions for improvement. I would like to concur with those that were expressed articulately by my colleagues this morning, and especially suggests that the coverage zone, which I described as adequate, that possibly, as discussed by advocates a few moments ago and Consumers Union, that the zone be extended to cover as much area as possible, especially those in which the children specifically are in these collisions. In conclusion, CFA strongly supports the proposed rule, which will vastly increase driver rear view visibility and decrease deaths, injuries, and tragedies caused by backover collisions. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you very much. Really do appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Weintraub. Our next presenter is Patrick Iveson. Video first? Okay. Would you like a microphone, by the way? I can bring this to you. You have it? If I can disengage it, I will do so. Come around. Oh, okay, fine. I'll get this for you. There's a ramp over here. Ramp is over here. I'll go around back. Okay, this is yours. It's on.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Start with the video.
Patrick Iveson was born a happy, healthy baby in July of 1994, but he's lived most of his life in a wheelchair.
We didn't have a car at the time, so Patrick and I walked everywhere that we went.
14-month-old Patrick was just learning to walk on September 24th, 1995.
I had been carrying him, and I set him down and was letting him walk, and we took a couple steps.
A motorist backing out of his driveway failed to see Patrick.
I was standing right there, and I didn't have time to grab him, and the driver's side of the rear bumper hit him and then knocked him down, and the back tire completely ran him over.
Patrick was airlifted to Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. The prognosis was not good. He'd suffered a major spinal cord injury and was paralyzed.
The path we were on ended instantly, and we started going a completely different direction.
Doctors told Jennifer that Patrick was a quadriplegic and would never have more than partial use of his body from the neck down.
I just kept thinking he was going to recover. I mean, even when we left the hospital, even now, I just keep thinking he's going to recover. I would lay in bed. I would worry about what his life was going to be like.
In December 2004, Patrick's younger sister Samantha asked Santa for a very special gift.
Samantha said, "Could you make my brother walk again?" And Patrick and I were both, because, like, how's Santa going to make that happen?
When people see Patrick and they don't know him, they see the wheelchair and they don't see the amazing person sitting in it.
Enter Project Walk. The center provides intense exercise-based recovery programs for people with spinal cord injuries.
We have the chain gang at Project Walk here, of which I am the first member.
The training philosophy is that this spinal cord injuries can regain function. Our perception is that the injury can improve.
Everyone in my family is a beast. I love them so much. They don't say it out loud, but I know that, like, my whole condition and stuff, it's hard to deal with, but we do the best we can.
It's not about walking, but it's about making the body heal properly, giving the person a chance to walk when they're able to walk.
I sometimes yell at my legs, too, to, get them going. I'm like, come on, just go. Get up there. Sometimes they listen, but not very well.
Despite his progress, some dreams seemed out of the question. Like many Southern California kids, Patrick loved the beach, but never thought he'd be able to surf. In 2004, the teenager got involved with Life Rolls On. The nonprofit organization is dedicated to helping people with spinal cord injuries learn how to surf. and participate in other sports. Former pro surfer Jesse Belauer launched the group after a surfing accident left him paralyzed.
Life goes on about hope and survival and independence and freedom, because when these people are doing these sports, that is some freedom that they never feel when they're on land in their wheelchair.
We put the kind toe straps right here, so my elbows just lock into that, so then I can lean into the turns and stuff. The outside people push me into the waves, and then if I fall like skidding into the wave, or if I fall halfway through, the mid team will pick me up.
A lot of responsibility. When he serves, everybody's listening because it's pretty intense.
The waves are really little, but that's fine. It's still overhead for me, so it's all good.
Surfing really humbles you and gives you so much freedom and independence.
When I'm actually in the water, you know, I'm looking back to the beach and seeing the empty wheelchair on the beach. But that's just kind of like a message right there.
Patrick got the message loud and clear. On September 22nd, 2009, he finally did the impossible.
My trainer and I were like, why don't we try walking?
Come on. Yeah.
I made Mom cry. I made her proud.
It was unbelievable to watch. It was a really special day.
You crying?
No.
In addition to his trainers at Project Walk, Patrick's service dog, Kona, lends a paw when necessary.
I need help getting my shoes off. Shoe, that's it. That's it.
Patrick calls him a chick magnet.
Whisper. Yay, good boy. All the girls like, hi, Kona, hi, Kona.
That was easy.
Yes, good boy. I'll put him somewhere cool.
Okay. Just keep
He'll be all right.
Or I can just take him. And then everything's good.
He has his moments of getting the ladies. It's a tag team. We help each other. Kona just kind of baits them in. It's teamwork.
How was everyone's weekend?
Pretty good.
I was good. Yes.
You ask anybody that has a spinal cord injury, a lot of people think, oh, they all want to walk again. That's not necessarily the truth. They all want to be independent again.
I bought myself a little video camera and I've took video of all summer. I have my eyes set on USC Film School.
Surfing, walking, he's doing everything that everyone said he couldn't, which is really a message anyone should take with them, that even when people say you can't, that just gives you more of a reason to say you can.
That was good. That was really good.
All right. Well, that always makes me laugh. That was easy part. never gets old. Well, thank you for having me here and for listening to everyone's stories and such today. My name is Patrick Iverson, and I am 16 years old. And I came here from my hometown, San Diego, California, to talk to you guys today about how important and absolutely necessary complete rear visibility is in all automobiles. On September 24th, 1995, my mom and I were out on a walk, and we lived in a small Southern California community, and it was a beautiful hot Sunday afternoon. My mom and I didn't have a lot of money, and we didn't own a car, so we just walked everywhere. And this Sunday changed our lives. We were walking home, and we're directly behind a car when the driver backed up suddenly. And my mom had been carrying me, but seconds before she set me down, and she remembers grabbing for me and reaching for me and just barely missing before the car struck and completely ran me over. She tells me she's just started screaming, and people came running from every direction, and they could tell by the screams that something that was horribly, horribly wrong. And She tried to get me out from under the car, but I was wedged between the rear tire and the bottom side of the car on the passenger side. And a man came up and lifted the car just enough to have her be able to pull me out. And when she did, she knew that I was gone. I was completely limp, covered in blood, and I was turning blue. And she just clutched me in her arms, screaming, "No, no, no!" A man who witnessed the accident came running up and just tried to just said, okay, just let me take a look at him. You know, it's just a little cut on his forehead. Let me just see what I can do. And it wasn't just a little cut on my forehead. I actually had what was called degloving of the scalp. The car had completely peeled back my scalp. So it was a very horrific injury. But, you know, just out of desperation, my mom listened to him and set me on the ground. And he immediately started CPR and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And after a few rounds of that, I began to cry weakly. And moments later, my paramedics showed up, and then within a few minutes, a helicopter landed in the parking lot of a nearby restaurant. My mom wasn't allowed to go in the helicopter with me, so when she finally reached it to Children's Hospital, I was already in surgery. So all she could do was just sit in the waiting room and wonder if she was ever going to see me alive again. And after some time, someone from the hospital came up and said, come with me. And he took her to a conference room. And she didn't want to go in that room because she was convinced that they were going to sit her down and tell her that I had died. She finally went in, and they told her the news that she actually had desperately wanted to hear. I was stabilized, and I was alive, and I was in surgery. I sustained a C4, C5 spinal cord injury, and I was unable to move anything from the neck down. In the police report, it listed my injuries as a minor scalp laceration, and the driver was cited for unsafe backing. So the challenges of a spinal cord injury go well beyond the inability to walk. I'm unable to dress myself, take a shower, or even use the restroom without assistance. Just imagine for 1 second laying in bed until someone comes in to get you up, or having your blood pressure spike every time you need to use the restroom because your body's unable to regulate its own nervous system. This spike in blood pressure is actually a medical emergency that I have to deal with and monitor really closely every day. I have literally spent thousands of hours in rehabilitation and therapy, and currently I spend 8 hours a week in rehab trying to gain some independence and function back. You know, this is my reality. I recently turned 16 and trained very, very hard to be able to drive a vehicle. I have a really old van with 200,000 miles on it. I'm actually kind of proud of that number. You know, I've been looking at the little odometer going up. And so we modified that so that I could drive. And the very first modification we made on it, before the hand controls or anything, was we bought a little $60 backup camera to put on it. You know, so because I can't look over the back of my shoulder, and also backing up blindly is just dangerous, you know. So even now, myself, I'm short, you know. I'm not very tall in my chair, and on 2 separate occasions, I've come close to being hit again. And on one of them, the only reason the person stopped was because someone with me yelled and smacked the bumper of the car, and the guy slammed on his brakes. You know, my mom almost had a nervous breakdown right there in the parking lot. So, you know, I'm not here today to complain about my life. In fact, quite the opposite. I survived an accident that many others didn't. You know, it would be foolish of me to complain. There's not one moment of my day that isn't affected by my injury, but I cherish this life that I was given. It would be an absolute shame if I wasted any of my time thinking about what I couldn't do instead of what I can do. The reason I'm here today is to honor those children that didn't survive and couldn't be here. I want to speak on their behalf so that the world understands that it's impossible to avoid hitting something that you simply cannot see. Just like when I was 14 months old, little children don't understand the dangers. You know, it's dangerous to be behind a car, and the driver cannot see you if you're 2 feet tall, you know? Parents do the best job they possibly can to protect us, but, you know, we we're spunky little kids, you know. We make it impossible for them to do it sometimes. And you know, children are quick and fearless. You know, my mom, Kona, and I would not have traveled 3,000 miles, and I certainly wouldn't have spent 6 hours on a plane with Kona to get here if we didn't think it was absolutely incredibly important to prevent children from being injured or killed in the blind zone that exists behind all vehicles. Every single vehicle has this zone. So please issue a strong standard that eliminates the blind zone behind a vehicle. This standard is just as important to America's children as seatbelts or airbags. Please make sure that no other family has to suffer the loss of a precious child, or that children who are meant to run and play don't have to rely on a wheelchair or those around them to move on.
Patrick, thank you so much. Thank you. Actually, hold on one second, Danny. Actually, I have one, more so of, I have a question for you, but it's more so a request. You are absolutely you exemplify everything about advocacy. Your strength, your generosity, your perseverance, your inspiration. And I want to thank you so much for taking time out to share your experience and to share your entire story about how you have overcome what many would think as, you know, as a barrier to living, and you've shown how you can richly embrace life and move forward. And for that, I'm going to ask a question on behalf of myself and the Secretary of Transportation, Ray LaHood. You say that you're just turned 16 and you're a new driver?
Yes.
Well, we have a special emphasis on teen drivers, and I would love to recruit a young man like you to talk to other teens about how to drive your vehicle safely.
I would love to.
All right, so we're going to be talking to you after we're done. I know we're putting you to work on advocating for rear visibility and everything else that you're doing, but I think you're a good, strong young man with broad shoulders. We want to enlist you in the fight to help other teens, you know, be safe drivers as well.
I would absolutely love to be involved.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you so much for everything.
Help you here, if I may. Yeah. Okay, I got to wake him up. Kona, it's time to go. That was really remarkable, I must say. And Patrick, you know, I went to University of San Diego School of Law long before you were born. That was my only time living in California. I did not have the nerve to go near a surfboard. No way. But you really do have a kind of a San Diegan spirit as well. I can see that in you. Our next presenter is from the Dallin family. Brandy Dallin. Did I pronounce that correctly? Dallin.
Thank you, Brandy.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I apologize because I will be very emotional. So hopefully I can keep it together enough.
No need to apologize.
My name is Brandy Dolan, but it's Abigail I want to introduce you to. It's my baby girl. Abigail is the spunkiest little person you'll ever meet. These pictures were made on her birthday, April 9th, 2010. She turned 2. She sang herself happy birthday very loudly in Olive Garden. And then we spent a long time trying to get these pictures, in between lots of pictures of her looking like this, and her sticking her tongue out, and her blowing spit bubbles, which was her new trick. You know, she was the life of our family. 2 days after April 9th, on April 11th, 2010, she was in her yard playing with her brother and sister. My husband was doing yard work, and I was not home. Her brother threw the ball, a tennis ball, and she chased it into our neighbor's driveway, which was immediately adjacent to our front yard. When she hit the driveway, she tripped and fell on her knees. And being the spunky little girl she was, she proceeded to pitch a fit because she had fallen down, and she was not happy about not being able to achieve what she wanted to, which was to get the ball. At that exact same time, my neighbor, who was all of 19, was backing out of his driveway to get pizza for the family and driving a very large SUV, and he could not see her. Back to what you said before, he just could not see her. And backed right over her. My son, who was 4 at the time, was standing feet away, reaching out, trying to stop the car. And he still lives today with that guilt that he was not strong enough to stop the car. My daughter, who was 6, was around the corner, and my neighbor was yelling at her to go and get her sister. And I'm so thankful that she did not go and try to get her sister, because she would not have been able to pick her up or move her safely, and then I would have had 2 children hurt. But my neighbor backed over, the tire went over her head and basically crushed her skull. I received a phone call about an hour later. My cell phone battery had died and I was not at home. And I received a phone call that just said, basically, your daughter's been hit by a car, go to the hospital. So I drove about 45 minutes to the hospital, having no idea what I was about to deal with. I had no idea if I was looking at broken limbs, or if we were going to have to stay in the hospital for a while, or if she was going to be in a wheelchair, or if she was already gone. I had no idea. And so walking through the door of the hospital and seeing the patient care representative standing there waiting on me was horrifying. And to have him walk over and say, "Are you the mom?" You know, no one wants to be the mom when you walk into an emergency room. He quickly grabbed very tightly onto my elbow and steered me towards where the doctor was giving my husband a little glimmer of hope. You know, the doctor said that they had got her heart started again, and that they were going to work to get her stable enough to airlift her to a children's hospital in our city. Unfortunately, as the doctor was talking to my husband, she crashed again. And so they allowed us to walk back into the room to see her, not knowing that she had just crashed and they were up on the table doing CPR as I walked in. So for me, I walked into that hospital room. I saw my tiny little daughter laid out on the table, so still, with a man on top of her doing CPR. And I waited for 5 minutes until the doctors decided that they would pronounce her dead, that there was nothing more they could do. At which point I was screaming, obviously, and rushing over to her and begging her to just smile at me one more time. I thought if I could see her dimples one more time, I would be okay. But of course that was not going to happen. And so I had to look at her skull crushed. I had to look at blood coming out her ears and her nose. And then over her body, I had to tell my 13-year-old that his sister had died. And then I had to walk out of that room and tell my other children that their sister had died. And I feel like I left myself there on the hospital floor. And it's been almost a year, and I still feel like I left myself there on the hospital floor. Weeks later, getting an autopsy report in the mail and reading about my child's perfect, healthy little body and the massive skull fracture she experienced, the brain bleeding she experienced, was horrifying. To have my 4-year-old tell me about his sister screaming as the car ran over her, and have to live with him having those nightmares still, day in and day out, a year later. To have to live with him telling me he wants to go to heaven too and trying to find ways to do that. At 4, he's not suicidal. He just doesn't understand that heaven is forever, and he has no comprehension. To have my infant, who was 5 weeks old when his sister died, to have him grow up and not know his big sister who adored him. To have my daughter still cry herself to sleep at night. My husband lives with incredible guilt. He was home with her. He was responsible for her. He was right there and could do nothing. And he still has to suffer with that guilt. And, you know, grief is more than just missing her, because we do. She was so much a part of us. But it's missing my family, what my family was and never will be again. It's missing our future and what we saw as our future. It's missing the innocence of my children. I can't express to you how devastating it is to actually lose a child. But also for the boy that actually ran over her. His family is devastated as well, and his family is suffering as well. And you know, if he had had a backup camera, he could have seen her, and none of us would have to suffer like this. The whole community has suffered losing this one little child. So when I hear people talk about, you know, the cost of this, in all honesty, what is the value of a life? You know, it doesn't matter what the cost is. The absolute best top standard should be followed, even if that saves only one child. That is the value of a life. It's too late to do the right thing for her. It's too late to save her. But the rest of America's children still need this. They need the strongest, most extensive coverage that they can get. They need a rule that will cover them in those blind spots. You know, I'm not an engineer. My husband is. He could probably talk to you better about this than I can. But when I hear someone talk about 130-degree coverage or 180 degrees, well, she would have been on the outside of 130. She was right under the tire. So, you know, I think that that's a very important thing to look at. As a parent, knowing that the technology is there and that it's not standard is upsetting. And, you know, knowing that it needs to be standard is just, you know, there's just no doubt in my mind. It's just like someone said before, it's a moral choice. It's not a, you know, economic choice. This is a child. She was real. She's a real person, and she's still very important. Thank you.
Brandy, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, especially for such a recent loss. It's your leadership and strength that really, people that came before you dealing with this issue several years ago got the Congress to move forward in a way that it frankly never has in vehicle safety, and also definitely touched the hearts and minds of my staff here at NHTSA and myself as well as the head of this agency. So I know how hard that is, and I know the fact that no day will ever be the same for you, and we appreciate you extending yourself for other families, not only here in America but possibly around the world, depending on the success of this role. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for your presentation. As I mentioned earlier, the courage that some folks are able to display in presenting their actual stories in this kind of situation is just amazing to me. But it really helps put the human dimension on what we're talking about. With that, I think we'll break for lunch until 1 o'clock sharp and pick up with our presentations at that time. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you're from outside the building, there will be folks who can explain to you how to locate our cafeteria. Food's actually pretty good. There are other places in the neighborhood, but let's try to be back by 1, please. Thank you very much.